Cultural Creative. This has been a long time coming. I'm extremely pleased to have an incredible guest today, Light Watkins. Light, I have to say, I didn't mention to you before, when I launched this one-on-one conversation series, this is really an extension of the event series that I used to host with Soho House. When I launched this one-on-one conversation series, I wrote a list of people that I really wanted to talk with, and you were at the top.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm very proud and grateful and blessed to have now be able to, in December, to have you on this conversation. So thank you first and foremost.
Yeah, I'm honored, man. I know there was a little bit of a back and forth trying to schedule it, but I'm glad it worked out. I'm glad to be here. I can hear still a little bit of feedback. I don't know if that's just my own thing, but I just want to make you guys aware of that. There we go. Now it's gone.
Perfect. Yeah. So, Light, let's get into it. I want to, obviously I know about your story. We've met quite a few times. And what I would say is every time I see you or interact with you, it leaves me feeling enlightened, inspired, and it makes me think about things in life in general. I don't know whether that's what everybody has when they see you, but, and here's the really random thing. I always meet you at the right time when I need to think about something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, man. I mean, you know, in the sort of mindfulness worldview, it's always the right time. So it kind of makes sense that, you know, and I feel the same way about you. I think we've even commented about that before, how I've kind of teased you and said that the way I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing is because I keep running into you. I know I'm vibrating at the right frequency because, you know, you run into good people, you have great conversation, you feel more expansive afterwards. And I think that's always a good sign, no matter where you are. If you're around people that make you feel expansive, then you want to definitely keep doing more of whatever you're doing, because that's keeping you at the right frequency.
Yeah, I love that. I love everything you said about that. Let's go back a bit further so that people that are watching or listening can understand a bit more about you. Can you give us, I mean, first and foremost, tell us ultimately what it is that you do currently, who you are. I mean, that's a bit of a large question, but and then let's go a bit further back as well.
So when I hear the question, who are you, or what do you do, immediately my mind goes to meditation teacher, because that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years. I've been a full-time meditation teacher, but then I have to also acknowledge the fact that I write books now, and so I'm a writer. And I speak a lot, so I'm a speaker. So I have to add that into the mix. In fact, I'm probably doing more of that than I am meditation teaching since the pandemic started. But yeah, altogether, I am a content creator of inspirational messaging. So that's what I say, and I do that through speaking, through teaching, and through writing.
So 15 years, you said, of teaching meditation. What was the path? How did you get to that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was actually, so just to give you the long story short, I started off as a fashion model, which sounds very opposed to teaching meditation. But the great thing about being a fashion model that I didn't appreciate as much as I do now is I had a lot of free time on my hands. Now, I didn't want to have this free time. Obviously, you want to do as much work as you can. And I was never quite at supermodel status. So I was making just enough to be able to pay my bills, maybe save a little bit. Then I had all this free time on my hands to do other things that I found interesting. And that's where I got into yoga. That's where I first started dabbling in meditation. I started reading these spiritual books. And then I found myself hooked on all of that, so much so that modeling started to seem less and less interesting. And then I moved from New York, where it's kind of the center of modeling, to Los Angeles. And I kind of hung up my runway shoes and I started teaching yoga. I did a yoga teacher training back in 2002, back when being a yoga teacher was still kind of a novelty. And then about 3 months after I landed in Los Angeles and started teaching yoga, I was introduced to the man that became my meditation teacher. And it really changed the course of my life, because I never saw myself as being that invested in a meditation practice. I mean, I was meditating here and there, kind of not really knowing what I was doing, but feeling like this is what meditation is. You just kind of sit down, you close your eyes, you sit with your back straight. It doesn't feel particularly comfortable, but, maybe at some point you reach nirvana. So that was my understanding. And then I met this meditation teacher in February of 2003, and he completely reoriented my understanding of meditation. And he gave me a mantra, and he told me to stop trying to sit up so straight and sit back with my back supported and be comfortable. And I started meditating for 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. And I found that I was like a fish to water. I mean, it was fantastic. I started having these amazingly blissful meditation experiences. I had no idea meditation could feel so good. And it wasn't my imagination. Just like in the previous 2 or 3 years, I felt like I had to use my imagination in order to feel like something was happening. But in this one, it was as obvious as sleeping or doing something very tangible. You felt like you were sitting there and going to a specific place that was other than your surface mind. And so I knew instantly that I wanted to teach it, because I was already in yoga teaching mode, and meditation is a short leap from yoga. And then about 3 or 4 years later, I ended up taking a teacher training with my teacher in India. And I was away for a few months, and I came back and I started teaching people meditation out of my 1-bedroom apartment in West Hollywood. And I did that for the next 14, 15 years.
Well, let me just go back a little bit. There was something you said that when you first met your meditation teacher, and that to just describe that feeling of how you realized or how it felt to have that consistent practice. Because going to that practice, going to that place, can you just describe that a bit more? Because, when I talk to people about meditation, a lot of people get switched off by it. They don't really truly understand it. So just explain you going from a fashion model to come into LA, getting connected through yoga, and then into meditation. Like, how was that for you?
So the process that the experience that I was having in meditation that was unique from my prior experiences. So previous to learning with my teacher, I would literally be sitting there for, say, 15 or 20 minutes, and it would feel like an hour, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about this and thinking about that and contemplating this and focusing on that. And the time was just inching by. I was antsy. I already have tight hamstrings. And so sitting with my legs crossed and or with my back straight, it's just like, it's torture. It's like getting waterboarded after about 2 minutes. And it just wasn't very enjoyable. And so what I would experience with my meditation practice after meeting my teacher was I'm sitting down, I'm comfortable. And then the next thing I know, I feel like I'm in this sort of dreamy state. And then the next thing I know, I don't feel anything. I'm not thinking about anything. I don't feel anything. I've essentially gone beyond the surface level of awareness, and I'm in this other state. Now, the tricky part about that experience is that it's really hard to describe to someone who's never had the experience before. But what I can say is it's kind of like what being healthy feels like. So being healthy is the absence of pain, right? If you have a migraine headache, if you have a sore throat, if you have a achy back, right? All you want to do is get healthy. And what does that mean? It means one day you wake up and you don't feel the pain in your throat. You don't feel the pain in your head. You don't feel the pain in your back. So it's the absence of pain that equates to balance. And it's the same thing with happiness, right? Happiness really is the absence of suffering. That's what it is. It's not some kind of ecstatic state where you're walking around with a smile plastered on your face all the time. It's a state of inner contentedness, and you may experience temporary peaks and valleys, but your baseline level of awareness is at this kind of content state where you're good where you are. And so I equate the same thing with meditation and getting to that settled mind state where you're in the absence of surface thinking, surface awareness. So it doesn't feel like anything specific. It's when you don't feel anything, and that's how you know you're there. So what that also means is you can't know you're there while you're there, because if you knew you were there, then you're not having the absence of awareness.
That's what I was just going to ask you, or really say, is that it's almost counterintuitive, right? What you're explaining is that it's the absence of the things that we're used to or kind of subconsciously trained to have. It's the absence of those things. So when you say about reaching a certain state through meditation, what you really mean is that you can't mentally or physically know that you're there. It's just the absence of everything that is running through your mind. And that was always something that I loved. I mean, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but that was something that I really loved, that I connected with, that you said in your book, Bliss More, and I'll never forget that, is that you can't turn off the noise. And a lot of people that I talk to about meditation is, yeah, I tried it once. I tried it, a few times. I tried it for a week, and it doesn't work because I can't turn my mind off. But there was something very clearly that you say in your book, is that it's not about stopping the thoughts. It's not about turning those off. It's about, like you say, it's the absence of those things.
Yeah, and it's even learning how to use your thoughts to arrive at that state. So the whole thing with meditation, just to keep it really, really simple, is about doing less. So we have a tendency to do more. Oh, I need to focus on this. I need to concentrate on that. I need to control my mind in some way. And so by doing all that mental activity, you're actually keeping your mind even more aware, even busier than it would be otherwise. And what you really want to do is you want to practice the art of doing less, doing least, and then ultimately doing nothing. And, you and I were talking about surfing before this call, and I equate the practice to surfing, because a lot of times people think, well, I'll just show up on my meditation cushion and sit down. But there's an art to it. And it's the same with surfing. You don't just show up at any beach with a surfboard, right? You have to know which beach has the waves, what time of day the swell is coming in, what kind of board do you need, a long board or short board? Do you need a wetsuit? Like, there's all these hundreds of considerations that are going to make the experience exponentially more enjoyable. And the same is true with meditation. There's nothing arbitrary about the practice. And that's what I teach people how to do. It's not a guided experience. I teach people how to have an unguided, also known as silent meditation experience, which means no one's in your ear telling you what to do every 2 seconds. You're able to do it on your own. And it's just like with sleep. Like, imagine if you're trying to sleep and someone's in your bedroom whispering in your ear, okay, now just, let the thoughts go. And then you just like, shut the hell up so I can fall asleep. Like, that's why we call it falling asleep. You don't have to do sleep. Sleep is something that happens to you when you position yourself in the way that allows it to occur. And the meditation is the same thing. It can happen naturally when you position yourself to allow it to occur, both physically as well as mentally.
I'm getting really excited by this conversation, because I really want to dig deeper into everything that you're saying. First of all, I want to go a bit further back. Something that's on my mind I wanted to ask. You're in New York, you're a fashion model. Between New York and LA and becoming a meditation teacher, on that journey, when you were in New York, were you ever connected internally, spiritually? Was there any of that before you moved?
100%. Yeah. I would say I was a meditation teacher years before I became a meditation teacher. I just didn't know it. I was a meditation teacher in New York posing as a model. But in the meantime, I'm reading Conversations with God. I'm reading the autobiography of a yogi. I'm reading all these like spiritual books, Celestine Prophecy, The Four Agreements, Seed of the Soul. And I'm having these conversations. Every conversation I'm having is leading back to God, to spirituality, to coincidence, synchronicity, all of these kinds of topics. This is before you even had the word wellness as a kind of a big description of the community. It was really just yoga studios, and then I was invited to these little meditation circles here and there. So I was doing all of that, and I was super engaged in it, and I was showing up at these random obscure meditation circles, not even knowing what I was doing, but I just wanted to be around that energy, and super interested in practices like astral traveling and channeling and just any kind of esoteric, anything that I could get my hands on. I was into it. So I would say that once I found my teacher, it felt like I'd been on this quest for years, and I finally made my way back home. And he kind of helped me develop a language around all of the things that I was interested in. And, you know, the modeling stuff, I was a vegan. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't like out partying or anything like that. I was I was living a very clean life as a model in New York. And then I just recognized one day that I had so much more to offer to the world than just standing in front of a camera taking photos. And I needed to make a change in some way. And I remember standing in my kitchen when I was about 28 or 29, and I made a vow to myself to always follow my heart, probably after I read some spiritual book about that, about following your heart. And I said, I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to start following my heart. My heart told me move to Los Angeles. So I had a couple of friends who had already moved out to Los Angeles from New York. So I knew I was going to do it. I just didn't know exactly when. And then, of course, as nature does, it used the catalyst of a breakup. I had a very challenging breakup in New York, and then I just knew it was time to get out of Dodge. So I used that to move to Los Angeles, and then that's where I got into yoga and to meditation full time.
So I had a picture in my mind when you were talking about being a fashion model of some kind of Zoolander style Light Watkins in New York. But what really you've explained is that you were, like you said, you were masquerading as a fashion model when you were a meditation teacher, and really the universe, regardless of how you got there, the universe brought you to Los Angeles through the process to where you are now. Mm-hmm. So what I really want to know is how is night and day meditation and not meditation for a person?
You know, I have been running this thought experiment for a long time around not meditating. And the problem is I don't have enough discipline. In other words, I've been meditating like clockwork, man, for almost 20 years since I learned. And I can't bring myself to stop because it feels so good. So I honestly don't know what it's like to not meditate after meditating. I only know what it's like now to meditate on a consistent basis. I do it every day, 20 minutes twice a day. But I will also say that before I started meditating, in working as a teacher, I come across three types of students. Number one, people who have hit rock bottom emotionally. Number two, people who've hit rock bottom physically, and their doctor said, you have to do something different or you're going to have a heart attack. And number three, people who are curious about meditating. Maybe they've already started meditating and they want to get better at it. So everyone falls into one of those three categories. Every now and again, there's, some miscellaneous exception, but for the most part, people are either spiritually poor and they want something that feels more connected, or they're physically out of balance. They can't sleep at night. They have autoimmune stuff. Their hair's falling out, stuff like that. and they need to do something different to strengthen their immune system, or they're just really curious about how they can refine the practice. And I fell into the curious category when I first started. So I was sleeping well. I wasn't overly stressed or anything like that. So I can't really speak to what that experience is like, but what I can do is talk about a lot of the experiences of the people that I've worked with over the years, because what makes me uniquely qualified to talk and write about the long-term effects of meditation is that I maintain contact with the people that I work with indefinitely. So what people don't realize is that a lot of meditation books are written by non-teachers. They're written by monks. They're written by celebrities who've meditated a few times. They're written by marketers, self-help gurus, life coaches, basically people who have a very casual understanding of meditation. They've gotten some benefit from it, and maybe they offer some guided advice. Close your eyes, follow your breath, blah, blah, blah. Whereas I am more like, I'm a meat and potatoes, meditation teacher that gets down into the nitty gritty with people. And I spend a lot of time with them, and I track their progress over years. So I've seen people who have been lifelong insomniacs start meditating, and they start sleeping like babies at night. I've seen people who have been on the brink of suicide start meditating, and then they get happier, and their depression goes into remission, their cancer goes into remission. I've seen people in the red zone in terms of high blood pressure and heart disease go into remission on that. So I've seen all of that. I get these emails all the time. People are reporting everything from I don't bite my nails anymore, which I've been doing for 20 years, to I no longer have that back pain as a 70-year-old man, to my foot. I had a foot problem that corrected itself spontaneously. All kinds of stuff like that. And I put a lot of those reports in my book. And I put a disclaimer in the book saying that, guys, these are not people who read about meditation in a book. These are people who actually work with me personally and who I supported over the years. And I really found that made a big difference for me, being someone who had been dabbling in meditation for a couple of years. And it made a big difference in their case too. But at the same time, there was no Bliss More, which is the name of my book. There was no Bliss More available when I first started off meditating. I wish there was, and that was one of the motivations behind writing my book, is because I wanted to write a book that I wished I had on the early days, so I didn't have to waste so much time with all that shoddy guesswork trying to figure out how to quiet my mind.
I want to come back to the book in a second. I'm hearing all of these incredible stories, and I've read those in your book as well, of what you have seen happen when you've taught people how to meditate properly and the benefits of meditation. But just explain, people seem to think or believe with meditation that you do this thing and you reach a higher state. Mm-hmm. But what people don't, can you just explain actually the real benefits in day-to-day life of what a meditation practice can provide you? Because a lot of people, like I mentioned before, I tried it once, it doesn't really work, or running's my meditation, or this other thing is my meditation. So that's kind of, everyone has this is my meditation, right? But there is no replacement for actual real meditation. So you can just explain a bit about how the benefits start to slowly creep into daily life.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, a little disclaimer, a couple of things about meditation we need to understand. Meditation is a very generic word. Right. So it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. That's number one. Number two, there are now hundreds, if not thousands, of studies, scientific research confirming that there are tangible differences in your entire physiological and neurological structure before, during, and after meditation. So some of the more common benefits in terms of science are that you use more of your available brain power. Your nervous system goes into the parasympathetic state, which means the part of the body that you don't have to think about starts to perform in a more optimal way. And your nervous system also can relax deeper than sleep, even for the time you're sitting in meditation. So those three things can seem interesting if you only meditate every now and again. If you meditate on a consistent basis, they can have a profound difference in your mental, physical, and spiritual state over the course of several years. So meditation is a long-term practice where the benefits it's a cumulative effect. It's just like investing, right? You're not going to become wealthy investing for a week or for a couple of days. But if you leave it in and you keep putting more into it on a daily basis or on a weekly basis or monthly basis over the course of several years, then the cumulative effect, the compound interest on your investments are going to be exponential in their growth. So with meditation, your ability to perform optimally, which means you can do things fast, calm, and accurately, much better than you would have done them had you not started meditating however long ago, right? And that's kind of the most practical benefit. Now, the other thing is that where this comes from, meditation comes from South Asia, mainly India, Pakistan, that area, the Indus Valley region, thousands of years ago. They didn't care about all that productivity and stuff. That was a desirable side effect, but the real reason why they were meditating was to get closer to God, which was, in their terminology, Brahman, closer to their, or to become more self-realized. In other words, to feel the connection between yourself and everything and everyone else. So for us, we want the productivity thing, and as a side effect, we feel more connected. And then what we realize after 3 or 4 years is that feeling connected is the real benefit, and the productivity stuff is the nice, desirable side effect. But the productivity thing is like the lead magnet for us in our culture, because that's what we still equate success and everything with making a lot of money and having assets. And I get it. That's just, we're so in it, we don't even see it. But as a desirable side effect to all of that, when you feel that strong spiritual connection, which means, and I don't mean that in a religious way, I mean that in a metaphysical way, right? You feel a connection to something outside of yourself, and then you find yourself becoming more altruistic, more concerned for your fellow mankind. You find yourself being of service more. You find yourself being less attached to things, which again, to the Western sort of success-oriented mind sounds a little bit like, oh my God, I don't want that. But with age and experience, everybody reaches a point where you realize actually that's where it's at. Because if you look around at all the people with all the money and all the success, it's not necessarily equated to happiness, right? If that was the case, then people who had all that stuff would never do things and say things that reflected that they weren't happy, or that they were, in fact, the opposite of that, which is experiencing great amounts of suffering. So you'd be hard pressed to find someone who meditates for 20 years who ends up, committing suicide or walking around in a funk of depression or something like that. And again, that's just the correlation that you arrive to empirically just from being in the practice. Unfortunately, you have to practice in order to see and feel that pattern versus not having practice at all. But it's still fine, because the way this whole life thing is structured is that you're going to reach a point where you can't sustain not doing anything, especially if you have the resources to invest some time and effort into your internal state of consciousness. And so that's what's great about it. There's no escaping it, really.
Well, I think what I find really interesting hearing you say that, Light, is that you mentioned about where the origin came from in India and Pakistan, and where and why and the reasons behind that. And I think that is something that is not thought of here in the West, or is forgotten very easily here in the West, is to be connected on a spiritual level, and I mean internally and externally with our surroundings, as in plants, trees, birds, nature, those sorts of things, right? I think that we're conditioned in a way to, like you very much said, with the point of being focused on achievements for validation, whereas we can, through a consistent meditation practice plus some other things, we can achieve internally what we need ourselves without reaching for validation from external things.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be an either or, because I don't want people thinking, oh, he's anti-capitalist or he's anti-success. I'm not anti-success at all. I'm pro-success and I'm pro-happiness. Like, why not be happy while you're being successful? In fact, why not achieve as a byproduct of your happiness, right? Because when we talk about following your heart or allowing your inner guidance to dictate your next move, right? That's what being self-realized does. You have messaging that's coming from inside, internally, and that messaging is taking you in the direction of your path or your purpose. But if you never stop doing and start and sit down and be for a minute here and there, you won't be able to hear it as clearly. And all the messaging that you're going to get is, comparing you to other people, which then breeds more suffering.
So let's go back to the book. I don't know if I ever actually told you this, Light. I had a meditation practice before my wife and I moved to the US. I'm trying to think now. I've been meditating at least over 10 years. I'm sure of that. And we've been here for 5.5 years. And so when I think I heard you on a podcast talk about your book. And so when I purchased your book and read it, that could have been around 3 years ago, maybe around 3 years ago. That completely changed the way I meditate. And I keep the same practice now since I've read your book, and I've read it several times. And I'll tell you the reason why is because you lay it so clearly for anybody to understand how easy it is to meditate. Now, you mentioned earlier about sitting up straight with your back straight and cross-legged, or however, you see those images, and that is so uncomfortable. Yeah, I went through that for 5 years thinking that was the right way. And then after reading your book and understanding, no, you can be in a position that makes you feel comfortable, and that takes you potentially to a place quicker through your meditation practice. And one of the things that really stuck with me is how you explain it's okay if you fall asleep during your meditation. And I've noticed that I know it's a reminder to me, if I fall asleep or drift off during my meditation, there's something else not quite right within my day-to-day life. And it reminds me to keep a check on. And it doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes every couple of days, every now and again, it does happen. And that was really striking how you explained that in the book. And I mean, I've bought the book for many people, and I'm an advocate to anybody I talk to about meditation. You must read this book, and tell me about how the process of the journey of you writing the book, and then beyond the book coming out, how that changed your life. Well,
look, I'm a bit conflicted, honestly, about it. I was in the beginning, especially because having worked with people one-on-one and in small groups for such a long time, I see the value of that. And I never want to be a person that puts someone in a worse position to have the full experience of meditation. And it's funny because when I got the book deal, the instruction was to write a book about meditation, how to meditate. And I was like, okay, cool, fine, I could do that. And I did it. There were 64 exercises. I've just reread my proposal the other night, and I was like, oh wow, I forgot. There's 64 exercises. And I turned in the first manuscript, and the publisher said, oh, we don't want you to write a book about how to meditate. We want you to write a book about how meditation works, which is a different thing, right? In other words, they don't want people stopping, putting the book down and exercising and practicing. They want a book that someone can just read through cover to cover on a flight from New York to LA, right? With very minimal exercises. And that's a different approach, because that means we're going to have to, part of what I find that helps people the most is practicing the principles, the fundamentals. So when I work with people one-on-one, it's over multiple days. And while we only meet for about an hour and a half a day, I give them practice homework. And they come back and they report their experiences. And it takes all of that practice to really feel like you know what you're doing. So when I watered it down, and I realized, it wasn't personal. This is how-to books, this is how they all are in the publishing world. They all are watered down versions of whatever the original concept was, so that the book is more accessible for the person who's not willing to put in the effort. And meanwhile, I was writing for the person who I felt like was going to put in the effort to get the most out of the practice. So I felt some kind of way about that, if I'm being perfectly honest. And at the same time, when you compare my book to compare to any other book on meditation, you'll still get 1,000 times more value out of it in terms of how to have a settled mind experience. Because like I said, 99% of the books out there are not written by meditation teachers, by people who work with regular people, not monks, but regular people, unpaid, right? Who track their progress over multiple years, and someone who knows how to connect with regular people in a very simple way with one technique, one tried and true technique that's been focus grouped for thousands of years, and it works. So that was what I wanted to offer. And I think even though it didn't meet my personal standards, it's still a very high level, high quality offering to the meditation space when you compare it to everything else that's out there.
But even if it didn't meet your expectations or wants for that book from you as the person, I can only imagine the amount of people that it's benefited from
100%. Yeah. I get messages all the time from people saying how much they benefited from it, which is awesome. Because like I said, it's a rare book in that it's not a bait and switch. Most of these books, even if it's written by a teacher, are teasers to take some online training down the line. You get the book. This is basically a brochure for my training. If you really want to learn how to do it, then you pay whatever, take the training, but I'm actually showing people the nuts and bolts with no training, where they can get everything they need within that book. And I kind of wrote it for that purpose. I come from a place where most people don't meditate. I'm from the South. I'm from Alabama. And I didn't write the book for now. I didn't write the book for people like me. I wrote it for people who work at McDonald's. I wrote it for truck drivers. I wrote it for people 50 years from now, 100 years from now, who, are so connected digitally that they just feel disconnected to everything and everyone. And hopefully, just like I used to stumble across these channeling and astral traveling books in the Beverly Hills Library when I first moved to LA, hopefully somebody stumbles across this book and it gives them some degree of insight that allows them to feel something real and tangible in their life. And just a quick little testimonial, I have a relative who went to prison, and they had never read my book. And then one day they requested that I send them a copy of my book. And so I just kind of ignored them. And then they requested it again. And I said, okay, well, he's serious. So I sent them a copy of the book, and he started meditating, which I thought was pretty cool. And then I went to visit him about 3 or 4 months later. And he pointed out some guy in the visitation room. There's like a visitation room with maybe 50 or 60 inmates all visiting with their family and friends. And he pointed out this guy, and he says, that's the prison meditation teacher. He said, I gave him a copy of your book, and now he's trained all the other guys in meditation. So the whole prison has started meditating from this one book, which I thought was like the highest compliment of what I wrote. Because if it can go viral in prison, then I did the job that I set out to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. I absolutely love that. Before you said that testimonial, I was thinking, I can see and imagine how cool it would be in 100 years' time, when who knows how technology is, and kids are growing up, and then all of a sudden they find Bliss More, the book, and connect with it in a way that and able to help them through whatever they might be going through. You sort of forget how books live on.
Oh yeah.
I love that. I love that. So I want to know really quickly, this is more personal. You trained in Vedic meditation.
Correct.
And so Vedic versus TM, can you give me some input on that?
Yeah. So when I first learned with my teacher, I didn't know anything about Vedic or TM or any kind of other distinctions. I just thought it was just meditation. And I found out later that my teacher had been a very high level instructor in the Transcendental Meditation Organization, and which was, it started off in the 1960s, and then it spread throughout the world. They had about 1,000 meditation centers, I think, at the height of the movement in the early 80s. Then people started retracting away from it because I think they jacked up the prices. A lot of the teachers started teaching independently of the organization. And that's where they started to send out legal notices, letting people know, particularly the teachers who were very effective, who were teaching lots of people, letting them know, hey, look, we can't stop you from teaching, obviously, but we just don't want you calling it transcendental meditation, because that's our trademark and our intellectual property. So they sent my teacher one of those legal notices, and he decided, okay, well, I'm not going to call it transcendental meditation anymore. I'm going to start calling it something else. And he thought about it, and all of this comes from ancient India, which is known as the Vedic tradition. Veda means knowledge. So the Vedic tradition means a tradition of spiritual knowledge. And so he started calling it Vedic meditation. And Vedic meditation, because it's it'd be like calling something, Christian knitting or something like that. Like, you wouldn't be able to trademark it because it's too generic. So it's untrademarkable. And so he thought that was that criteria made it a good name to call what he was doing. So I started teaching under the Vedic meditation moniker once I got trained with him.
So essentially it's very similar.
Yes, although legally I cannot say it's the same thing, and it's not really the same thing because of the way it's taught with Vedic meditation. We're all independent teachers. We're not an organization. So with transcendental meditation, the teachers that teach you are trained by and ordained by the Transcendental Meditation Organization, which means, and this is not a good or bad thing, I'm just telling you how it is, but the teacher is beholden to the organization, which means that if the organization says, okay, this week we don't want you guys talking about this particular aspect of the teaching, or we want you to charge this amount of money or whatever we want you to do, We tell you to jump. All we want to hear from you is how high, which, you know, as a teacher, it's kind of hard to do what you have to do and adhere to all these rules and regulations and restrictions as a teacher. Now, if I worked at Best Buy, then I got to follow Best Buy's, you know, rules of protocol. But with teaching people meditation, it's such an intimate personal experience. It makes you end up sounding a bit mechanical and cagey, kind of like that Best Buy customer service person. You're trying to return your thing and they're repeating the same thing over and over. And you're like, well, can't you just, you know, make an exception or talk to me like I'm a normal person? And so TM ends up getting a lot of flack for that reason, because their teachers are kind of, they have their hands behind their back a lot of times with different aspects of the teaching. Whereas with the Vedic meditation teacher, we're all independent. So we are beholden to the student. In other words, if we don't do a great job of teaching, then we don't get referrals. No one's sending me any students, unlike TM. And so I have to be a great teacher. Yeah. And so it really incentivizes one to become a better teacher, because you're out there in the wild on your own. And if you're not teaching, then you're not able to pay your bills, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I'm glad I asked you now, because I never knew that before. I just assumed there were two different methods of meditation, but it makes complete sense. And it's kind of crazy to hear you talk. I won't dwell on it too long, but hear you talk and explain about that, how there's bureaucracy involved in essentially something that is of natural and nature for inner peace.
But I get how they have to do it, because there's so many teachers and they have to manage them. You know, they can't have people going off the reservation and doing their own thing. That's one of their claims to quality, is that, look, we can ensure that just like if you go to McDonald's, the hamburger is going to taste the same no matter which McDonald's you go to anywhere in the world. Yeah. So they have that same level of quality assurance. The only thing is, I think it works against them over the long run, because it takes the really good teachers and it makes them have to kind of fit into these regulations, where you can't really have a lot of charisma that you would find otherwise in someone who's like a true teacher of something like meditation.
That makes total sense. So bring us up to date, Light. I know, obviously with whatever's been going on, things have been probably a bit different for you this year, but leading up to through last year, I know you were traveling a lot and hosting or being part of a lot of events. I know you were part of, was it Wanderlust? And obviously you were doing a lot of stuff with Shine.
Yes.
Do you want to mention a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I started, before Wanderlust, I started this group, this community called The Shine, which was a social gathering centered around inspiration. And the impetus for that was I stopped drinking alcohol almost 20 years ago now. And are you sober? Do you drink?
No, I'm sober. Yeah, I don't.
Okay. So how long have you not been drinking?
A year and a half.
Okay. So, when you stop drinking, I guess most people don't realize how much of our society is geared around alcohol. Almost every social event is geared around alcohol. And so the number and types of social events that you feel inspired to join gets smaller and smaller and smaller if it's centered around alcohol. Hopefully you get to a point where you just don't mind it, but after a certain point, you just don't want to be the only sober person in the room anymore, because it's just not that interesting. And I wanted to create a space for people like me who are not, I never had a problem. I never was an addict. I just decided one day that it didn't make a lot of sense to keep drinking. It wasn't returning on the investment as much as I thought it should in order for me to keep investing in it. And, but I still like hanging out with people. I still like great conversations and good food and soulful music. And I love a good TED Talk. And so I decided to create an event that brought all of the elements that I love together, and see if that whole axiom of if you build it, they will come is true. And so I started doing it in Los Angeles, and we went from doing it in a small little rented dance studio of like 10 or 12 people to doing it at these large event spaces with more than 300 people there. I was hosting them. And it was just a really great opportunity to meet awesome talent, hear great talks. We recorded everything. People in New York got inspired. They started doing them there. They started doing them in London. They did one in Germany and a few other places. And it kind of, we did it for 5 years on a monthly basis. So we did a few dozen of them, probably like 60 of them total. And then, yeah, once the pandemic started, we stopped gathering. And so it just kind of stopped happening for now, but we may kick it back up again once we can start gathering. But it was just a great way to stay connected and to remind ourselves of what's truly important when it comes to success and being in community and all of the things that we don't get with being virtually connected, but not physically connected. And then Wanderlust, I started doing meditation events with them. They invited me to do them after my book came out in 2018. So I did about 20 engagements with them. And I still have a nice, strong relationship with Wanderlust. I did a 21-day meditation challenge that's on Wanderlust TV right now that a lot of people seem to enjoy.
Well, that brings me to mentioning then that the fact that you offer a free 7-day meditation kickstart, right? So just explain a bit.
Yeah, it's donation based. So if someone doesn't have any money, that it's free. Otherwise, I take 10% of I was taking 100% of the donations and donating them to COVID related charities for essential workers and things. Then I started donating it to Black Lives Matter charities. Now I take 10% of it and donate it. And yeah, it's just a great way for people to be introduced to this sort of non-guided style of meditating. It's fun, it's approachable. We use lots of humor and real talk and accessible language. It's not overwhelming. It's just, you go to my website, lightwatkins.com, you sign up for it, you donate whatever you like. There's a suggested donation, I think of $25, but people donate $5, $10. It doesn't really matter. And then you get an email from me once a day with very specific, detailed instructions on what to do, how to sit, how to treat your thoughts, what happens if you fall asleep. Basically, all the things that I talk about in Bliss More, but without having to read Bliss More. And so it's kind of just, it is what it says. It kickstarts your practice. And then once you've been doing it for, a few weeks, maybe you want to get more comprehensive instructions, then you pick up the book and you just take it like that, very gradually.
And I also love your inspirational emails. I can't remember when it was I signed up to them. And I'll be honest, every day when I get to my emails and I start to clear through them, deleting spam or ones I don't want, yours I always leave unopened, and then with the premise to open it at some point during the day. And I will be honest, I don't get to open them every day. I should, because when I do open them, there's just so much inspiration through the short message that you write in that email. Mm-hmm. And every time I read them, I think, how do you sit there and come up with this so insightful thoughts to keep going every day?
Well, the answer is in the question. What I found is if you do it every day, it generates the content. That was the big secret, because that's one of the reasons why, I had the idea to do that for a couple of years before I started doing it in 2016. And I was afraid I was going to run out of content after 20 days. And what I found was I ran out of content after 20 days, but then new content started to come through me just by virtue of the fact that I was showing up. So yeah, that's been a really amazing journey, man. In fact, my next book is going to be a compilation of those daily doses. So I'm really excited about that. It's called Knowing Where to Look. It comes out in May 2021. I'm sorry, May 2021.
Wow. I was going to ask if there was a second book that you were working on.
Yeah, I just turned that one in. So it's in post-production right now.
I love that. So are you essentially, you're saying you'll be able to pick that book at any time and just flick through to a page?
Exactly. Whenever you need a little dose of inspiration, you just pick it up, you flip through it, and whatever catches your eye will deliver a nice little shot of the good stuff.
Yeah, I really love that. Is there anything else? Oh, talk to me about your podcast that you launched. You mentioned before we started talking.
In June 6th, I launched a podcast, which is kind of like The Shine, but in podcast form. And it's called At the End of the Tunnel. And I'm having conversations with people who started movements for social good, who've had to overcome all kinds of crazy obstacles. And that's been a lot of fun. It's long form conversations. I was inspired by Rich Roll and a few others. You're familiar with Rich Roll, obviously, right?
Yeah.
I've been on his podcast a couple of times, and I was always really impressed by how much research he would do. And so I wanted to have that with my pod. I wanted to do a ton of research. I wanted to make people feel very connected, kind of like what you're doing now. You obviously have done your research, and it just makes for a much better experience for the guest. And then people start opening up and sharing things they haven't shared before, which is really nice. So we're about 30 episodes in. It's been going great. I would love it if people check that out. You can find everything that I'm doing at lightwatkins.com or on social media at Light Watkins, Light Watkins.
And tell me the name of the podcast again.
At the End of the Tunnel, which is kind of a play on light at the end of the tunnel. At the end of the tunnel.
I love it. Before we wrap this up, I want to ask one last thing, Light, because it intrigues me to know this. Is there a person or a movement or even a brand or anybody that inspires you to be better?
Gosh, man, so much. I get inspired all the time by the smallest little things. Gosh, let's see. Is there a person or a movement that inspires me to be better? Let me think of one specifically. I mean, in the podcast, that's what I do. I interview people who have started movements and brands so it's all, and it's a lot of times it's ones you never heard of before. I think what inspires me the most are people who've overcome the most, to do what they're doing now. And there's actually a guy that is going to be featured on my podcast next week. His name is Arjuna O'Neill. He started this movement called Shared Necessities, and he's from Detroit. And his father was one of the biggest drug dealers in Detroit and basically recruited him into the drug game. So you can imagine your father telling you it's time for you to, you're old enough to start selling drugs now. And he ended up getting involved in all of that craziness and ended up getting shot. He had a near-death experience, and then he was paralyzed for a while, and then he clawed his way back, and then he found his path through all of that darkness. And now he's mentoring kids in mindfulness tools and wellness tools and stuff. And so most people have never heard of him before, but his story is just incredible. And I just feel so honored to be able to share those stories. But first of all, to hear the stories firsthand, but then to share them with a wider audience. And hopefully he gets a little more shine and can make a bigger impact as a result. So I would say he's the first person that came to mind. So I'll just go with that.
No, I love that. And thank you for sharing. I can't wait to see you again in person, Light. And I definitely want to talk to you about collaborating on a future Shine event or something. I think that's definitely in the works for us. You're an incredible person, Light. I can't thank you enough for the blessings that you put out for people to learn from, especially the book, like I said, that helped me massively. And yeah, thank you for your time today. It's truly, truly appreciated.
Thank you, man. Thank you for all that you do. You create such great content. You are, I don't know if you're still DJing on Sundays or whenever that is.
I'm on requests.
Yeah, you're always doing panels and bringing people together. You got your run club, so you're doing a lot out there, and you're one of my inspirations as well.
I appreciate that. That means a lot coming from you, Light. Truly.
Thanks, man. Thanks.
Thank you. I love you, Light. Thanks for your time, mate.
Okay, brother. Lots of love. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Welcome back to Culture Your Creative. I'm your host, Luke Ledhill. Culture Your Creative is a platform that really hosts a conversation with incredible people that inspire me, and I hope that you listening or watching can learn from something they might say and take that and implement that into your life as well. I run a brand development agency called Just Up the Road, essentially helping people, brands and companies portray their story, their narrative to the end customer or citizen, as I like to say. I also host the 21st Club think tank that brings together people that do good and give back through social, spiritual and environmental initiatives. Very grateful to be hosting this Culture Your Creative platform at Soho Works and also on the Connect.tv platform. Today, my guest, incredible person. I've been trying for some time now to have him on this one-on-one conversation. He has actually spoken on a panel as a guest that I hosted a couple of years ago. So let's get into this.